Hi everyone, my name is Abdul Rehman and I am a neuroscientist. Today I am accompanied with John Gallagher. He is working with mental health patients and people with addictions in a private hospital. He is also a postgraduate certificate in counseling from Strathclyde University. Today, John would be sharing with us his personal individuation journey and self-realization, and also talking on some archetypes and their integration. Thank you, John, for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you, Abdul. It's my pleasure. Um, Before I get into individuation, I'll give you a little bit of background about myself and
Sure.
how I got an interest in Carl Jung and how my individuation and inner journey came to fruition.
Hmm.
Um, I grew up in the west of Scotland um,
Hmm.
and in a working class family, and I wasn't academic. When I was younger at school, I kind of was average. I didn't really enjoy school. I was a very when I was young, I was a very practical person. I liked to work in the garden. I liked to fix bikes. I liked
Hmm.
to help my dad to work on his car. So I was a very mechanically practical person.
Hmm.
Uh, Mathematics was too abstract for me at school, and I couldn't learn by rote. I had to always know what X and Y meant, and so I kind of switched off with school, and I didn't do very well. But I did well enough um, to get into a trade. I wanted to use my hands and use work with tools. So I got a trade as an electrician,
Hmm.
and I served my time as an electrician, and I really enjoyed that. Um, I wasn't a typical male in the West of Scotland. I was a very sensitive child. I was like my
Hmm.
mother. I was very sensitive, and that wasn't really a masculine trait. Um,
Hmm.
and I had a very critical father, so I ended up being very repressed and quite an insecure person. I had very low self-esteem and low self-acceptance.
Hmm.
I didn't feel good about myself. And in my teens, and when I started working, I discovered alcohol, and this kind of brought me out of my shell, and it made me feel comfortable in my own skin.
Hmm.
So through my working life, I also developed this relationship with alcohol, and I love to go out partying and socialising. So my life kind of became. I used to work a lot of hours to make a lot of money, and then I'd go partying, and
Hmm.
that's which isn't unusual for a young people to do. But I was doing it more so than most other people,
Hmm. That's
uh,
true.
and that sort of led. And it was great for a while, but eventually, as time went on, I started to pay a price for it. But anyway, I served my time as an electrician, and then I progressed to becoming a testing and commissioning engineer with
Hmm.
diesel and gas generators. And I loved using my mind to problem solve, to fix problems. I really loved it.
Hmm.
Uh, and there was also a period where I worked in a design office as a design engineer. And this was kind of me into my 20s now, reaching my mid 20s. So I progressed through my job, and I
Hmm.
kind of rose through the ranks. But also, um, I started to develop addiction issues with alcohol, and didn't realise that what it was. It was just there was this anxiety and sort of depression was starting to take over my life, and I didn't know it was caused by addiction, so I was projecting it
Hmm.
into my circumstances. I thought, I need to get another job. I need to do this. So I kind of started what you call these geographical escapes. So I left my job and I went back to college, and I needed to address my shortfall in learning from my childhood. So now I thought it was a time to go back to school and really apply myself.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't just a geographical escape. I also had this hunger for knowledge that I will always have. I'm a lifelong learner. I'll always be looking for the next book to read, the next thing to learn. So I really was hungry for knowledge, and I threw myself into college, and I faced my fears about mathematics and all these things, and
Hmm.
spent a few years in education. Then I ran out of money, back into work. Um, got a fantastic job, was travelling the world, making a lot of money. Again, I excelled at my job. I mean, I had a really great technical mind, engineering
Mm-hmm.
mind, and I did well. But all the years through my teens and my 20s where I'd been involved in addiction, I hadn't grown emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
My childhood had left me disconnected from my feelings. So I was overly rational, and I was kind of, I was still emotionally, I was still a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually I reached a crisis with addiction, and that was my wake up call. I started getting into trouble, and I
Mm-hmm.
realised the only time I ever got into trouble was when there was alcohol involved, and I started to connect the dots. So eventually I realised I had to do something about it. So I found my way to a 12-step recovery fellowship. Have you heard of them?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not allowed to say the name because they're anonymous. They have a tradition of anonymity.
Yeah, I understand. Yep.
Um, I don't mind. It's not an ego thing for me. I'm a recovered alcoholic now.
Mm-hmm.
So I found my way to there, and it still took me a few years to separate from alcohol because there was an incredible amount of denial
Mm-hmm.
got through, and to realise that I really did have this thing. But eventually I did. I got sober, and I got into what's called the 12-step recovery program.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This is a psycho-spiritual development program. It
Exactly.
works on many levels. You become introduced to this concept of a higher power,
Mm-hmm.
which in Jungian psychology is known as the unconscious,
Yes.
right? And so you instead of using alcohol to cope with life, you start drawing upon this higher power, which initially some people they can make their higher power the group, the recovery group, or you have a thing called a sponsor. It's like
Mm-hmm.
someone help you and advise you, so people will project their higher power onto the sponsor. So then
Mm-hmm.
projection is helping people to adapt to recovery, and the goal is to eventually integrate the higher power and realise it's internal to yourself, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
unconscious. That's the goal of the psyche, is gradually to bring the unconscious into consciousness. So I got involved in that, and also in the recovery program, you're doing your shadow work. You're you're looking at your shadow, and you're accepting your shadow. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, I had a very dark shadow because I had a very bright persona. Because of lack of acceptance experience in my childhood, and the incredible sensitivity that I had, which for me was a feminine trait, that was all
Mm-hmm.
buried in my shadow. And so I had a very dark shadow and a very bright persona. I used to think, oh, I'm a great guy, I've never done anything wrong. And I used to be able to justify all my actions, but through my recovery, I managed to get honest and realise,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as perfect as I think I am. There's a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
I've lived in fear my whole life. A lot of my life's been lived with fear. And I was incredibly selfish and self-centered without realising it. I just thought the world would be a better place if everybody did what I think is right.
Mm-hmm.
There's narcissism in there as well. So gradually, it was a process of puncturing my ego
Mm-hmm.
and taking away this shiny persona, dissolving the persona with the integration of the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, in our youth, in our young life, we're not so much striving to become our unique self, we're striving to be accepted by the collective.
Exactly.
We're under pressure to conform and to be accepted and to be loved by our employers or bosses or parents. And in that process, we lose a lot of ourselves, we lose a lot of our authenticity. And what happens in midlife for a lot of people, what happened for me is I had lost so much of myself that I couldn't continue the way I was. I was so repressed, and there was only a fraction of me in my consciousness. So then began the process of individuation, which was I had adapted to the world, I had become successful, I had a developed ego. I knew I had formed a self-image, and these were things that I needed to do. But once I had achieved that, it was now I'm kind of jumping about here. But after being in a 12-step recovery program for 4 years and doing my inner work, what we call the inner work, dealing with the shadow,
Yep, exactly.
dealing with feelings, dealing with emotions, eventually I was completely incapacitated by depression, and that was the unconscious attention, and it was making me look inward to integrate my unconscious. So I'd managed to save a bit of money, and I was able to take some time out from work. And this depression took me inward, and I had what Jung calls a big dream. And I had this big initiation dream, which initiated me into the process of individuation. And the depression was caused by the fact I couldn't go any further forward in life without integrating my feelings and taking ownership of my sensitivity. Because I didn't know that I was a technician and an engineer, but I was also highly intuitive, and I wasn't aware of that. And this is where my sensitivity was coming from. And in order for me to be a healthy person, I had to embrace that. I had to embrace my intuition, and all the 12-step recovery work led me to do that. And so I had a huge initiation dream where I was introduced to my anima, my unconscious, and the child archetype, and the archetype of the self. And what I experienced was a partial integration of each of these archetypes. And it itself was what we call a prospective dream, which was showing me the process of individuation and self-realization, which was going to continue over the rest of my life. But when this happened to me, I didn't have anyone around me to advise me. I didn't really know what had happened to me, and it was a very dangerous thing, because when these archetypes come into consciousness, you can become possessed by them. And
Exactly, because they carry so much high energy.
Oh my God! So, and I did become possessed with them, and I did experience inflation. But because I had a developed ego, I was able, and I'd read Man into Symbols by Carl Jung, and I kept rereading it to remind myself this is a psychological process. These archetypes that are brought into consciousness, everyone has them. I'm not special, and I had to keep reminding myself that to put my feet on the ground. But all through the process, I would go through periods of inflation, then having to. Because I suffered from low self-esteem, so I was also vulnerable to inflation from the archetypes.
Yeah, that's true. I understand.
To compensate for low self-esteem. But as I progressed through the individuation process, I achieved self-acceptance. And I don't suffer from low self-esteem now. I don't think I'm any better or worse than anybody else. I think I have equal value to everyone now.
So I have a question here. Like, as you said that you had a low self-esteem and you recovered that with your journey of individuation. So do you think that to accept that low self-esteem, first you need to understand at some point, like everyone who suffers from that, do they really need to accept that it's okay to be imperfect? Because that's I believe that's kind of a spiritual aspect that you need to accept. And even Alfred Adler, who really talked about inferiority and superiority complex, I remember he said that, like, for a normal child development, he really understands that it's okay to be imperfect, right? But when, like, someone is shamed too much for their imperfection, and that's a wound that leads to superiority complex. Even I wrote on that, like, superiority complex is obviously a problem, right? When someone doesn't accept their low self-esteem, and they try heroic attempts, and they sort of make their self what they are not, right? So that's kind of a artificial, or you can say they kind of develop their persona. But that's, I mean, weird and irony that once they are shamed for low self-esteem, then again they're labeled and tagged and shamed for superiority complex, and that's the point
And
where they're left nowhere.
that's a mistake. They shouldn't be shamed for a superiority.
Exactly.
They should be given empathy, because that's what they lacked in the past.
Hmm.
That's the cure.
That's true.
That's the cure for it: empathy and understanding.
That's true. And I have one more question. As you said that you were at some point overly rational, right? You said that, and you felt that you just got dissociated from the inner child, right?
Yes.
And I remember that's kind of a inner exile, right? And it can be very much dangerous, and even when the child possesses you, to make you, the adult, aware of the child's existence. So can you share your journey? How does it feel like when the child possesses you? And I mean, if someone else suffers from that, so that they know and they can seek help from your journey.
Well, I would call it, when you're acting out, you're not in control of what you're doing. There
Mm-hmm.
are agencies within you
Mm-hmm.
that have been repressed, that are acting out when your awareness is slightly diminished, or your consciousness is taken up with something else, or you're stressed.
Mm-hmm.
These other components of the psyche that haven't been given attention,
Mm-hmm.
and they can cause you problems.
Mm-hmm.
So then a child might break through as tantrums,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
frustration,
Mm-hmm.
or a neediness for attention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd say for me, codependency was an um, I had learned
Yeah.
to
Mm-hmm.
undervalue myself and overvalue
Mm-hmm.
everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there was part of me. The more I did that, the more unhappiness grew within myself.
Mm-hmm.
So periodically, I would explode with anger,
Mm-hmm.
because I never knew how to express anger maturely. I never knew how to express frustration maturely in a
Mm-hmm.
way that wasn't offensive.
Mm-hmm.
So I would regret
Murray in his book Young's Map of Soul, he it's really awesome book. So he said that like anima is something very opposite to persona, right?
it
So
can it can be.
mhm. So one can get to know anima with the feelings, thoughts, emotions that are very subjective, right?
Uh-huh.
So one can get to know the anima from there. So could you just explain that thing? What does he really mean by uh, getting to know your subjective feelings,
Yes.
thoughts that arise out of nowhere, maybe,
Yeah.
and how do they introduce you, or how could they introduce anyone towards the anima, or how can those emotions actually take someone to unconscious?
Yep. Absolutely. This You're talking about. Jung had a four-stage model of anima development, and
Mm-hmm.
the first stage in Jung's model is called the Eve, um, and that's when a man has an attraction, a purely physical attraction for a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and this is your personal person, and this is also the stage of personal feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm going to talk in generalizations here.
Mm-hmm.
But a typical male's anima will be unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
A typical male will be led by thinking,
Mm-hmm.
rational thinking. The feelings will be there, but they'll be below the level of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
right? As well, everyone has feelings. It's just some are more aware of them than others. Um, so, when a man begins, a typical male begins the integration of the anima, he starts to become aware of feelings, personal
Mm-hmm.
feelings. So,
Mm-hmm.
subjective evaluation of objects and situations in his environment.
Mm-hmm. So that would lead to like kind of anima integration.
Yes. Well, it's already begun. If you've become aware of your feelings, you have already begun anima integration.
Mm-hmm.
And how it leads on to um, integrate the unconscious is we become aware of the unconscious. The unconscious works through our personal feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one of the ways it can do that is, um, say we're reading something, say an academic book or any other thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it has this quality of verisimilitude.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels like truth. You can't conceptualize it or analyze it. It's just a feeling
Exactly. Yep. True.
that's coming from your unconscious, and that is working through your anima.
Mm-hmm.
So your unconscious works through your anima.
So how does for a man, as we're talking about anima and animus, so
Mhm.
like in a marriage or in relationships,
Yes.
how does anima and animus works as projections, and what Julie as Young mentioned about contained and container in, I believe, the last part of development of personality, what does he really mean by contained and container, and how does anima and animus projection takes place, and uh, just to add more, how can one avoid that and save marriage and relationships?
Well, when you feel it's basically your anima and animus in this in relationships. It's your instincts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel an intense attraction for someone,
Mm-hmm.
this is your instincts working through anima projection. For a man, will project his anima. A woman will project her animus. And what the anima is, we have ideas about men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another area of the archetypes. It's not just feelings of intense relationship. We also have ideas projected onto another person.
Mm-hmm.
We have these kind of inborn archetypal ideas, which we add to through our experiences in life about men and women.
Mm-hmm.
So initially, we'll feel an intense attraction for someone, and that's the animal projection, and it's idealized. So we're idealizing this person. We're putting
Mm-hmm.
them on a pedestal,
Mm-hmm.
and that this is the process of adaptation where couples meet and they will mate and they will have children. They need to have that intense reaction.
Mm-hmm.
The anima and the animus. When you come under
Yep.
the spell of the anima and animus, you will project it onto someone and you will have an intense attraction for them.
Mm-hmm.
You tend to idealize that person because you're seeing your anima, you're not seeing the whole person.
Mm-hmm.
So as the relationship progresses
Mm-hmm.
in a marriage,
Mm-hmm.
what happens is the anima will start to dissolve. The anima projection will start to dissolve,
Mm-hmm.
and you will start to see the real person.
Mm-hmm.
And no one can live up to an ideal image. Everyone's imperfect.
Uh-huh. I see. So that's just like the ideal image minus the actual image, and that's where the actual relation begins.
Yes.
So and that's where most of the downfalls in relations and marriages take place. Like most people saying that you're not what I thought, and that's actually their own anima and animus
Uh-huh. That's
unveiled.
right.
So that's I was saying that before we got disconnected, that it's an inevitable process, right? One, we can't really avoid that, as the projections, they happen to us, right? We are not in control of them, as they're really unconscious. So how one can stay aware of that, like as you mentioned, that we experience at any cost, but how one can be careful with these projections and integrate them.
You can't be completely free of them, but you can.
Hmm.
They can become more manageable
Hmm.
by having the awareness of the dynamics that take place.
Hmm.
So you will still fall under the spell of the anima and animus, but you won't get so carried away.
Hmm.
So you'll be able to you'll have some more control over the process, but
Hmm.
you won't have full control. You know,
So. Mhm.
you'll
So
still
it's just about the awareness and learning things with the time and experience. So these are the things, they really can't be avoided, but one can be just aware and conscious of these things.
you won't get so carried. You won't get so carried away. You won't
Hmm.
become you won't behave irrationally, so irrationally, but you cannot completely control when these things become operative.
Hmm.
You still
Hmm.
come under a spell, but you will have developed a maturity where you can um, you're more aware of the dynamic. It gives you more
Hmm.
control of the process, but you'll still get pulled along by it.
Hmm. So, as you said that you were very sensitive as a child, right? So, how does or how is individuation journey like? Is it does that becomes difficult, or does that being sensitive? Does that help in the journey of individuation? Like being sensitive, it means that we are very vulnerable and exposed to feelings, emotions, hurt, anger, and anything. So, is that like the wounded child that makes us more sensitive, or it's like someone can be just by nature overly sensitive, or it's always, because I have read that it's mostly not, if not always, but mostly the wounded child that creates the hypersensitivity.
It makes you more vulnerable to trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another child who could have experienced my childhood wouldn't have been as severely affected by it because they weren't so sensitive. They had a what we call a thicker skin.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who was less sensitive and more extroverted
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't become so hard. They would still have become hard, but not as much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but sensitivity um, has a negative connotation in my culture. But
Mm-hmm.
sensitivity itself is not a negative trait; it's a very adaptive trait.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's one of the reasons why I do well working in care because I'm very sensitive to other people. I'm
Mm-hmm.
a very caring and compassionate person.
Mm-hmm.
I love my sensitivity for that.
So
But
it's not like always. It's not like always the wounded child that creates sensitivity.
no, no, it's an inbuilt trait. I was born with it. Um, well, empathy is also tied in with feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, but sensitivity has certainly been more aware. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
um, find it hard to explain it. But I'm an INTJ.
Uh-huh. I
My,
see.
my dominant function of consciousness is introverted intuition.
Mm-hmm.
But it tends to be people with strong intuition that are also highly sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And
But INTJs are really they are not that much exposed to their feelings,
oh,
like like to the introverted feelings. They really don't know what's going on inside them. I mean, no offense, but it's just like I'm saying in as per the typology.
I never used to be, but I'm an individuated INTJ. So
Hmm.
I now have that awareness of my feelings.
Hmm. I believe that's really hard for the rational person to integrate their introverted feeling. But it always confuses me, like a child or a person who is by nature very much sensitive, right? And they can be sensitive at the same time, and a very rational person like ENTJ or INTJ. So Do you think that does that creates conflict within their psyche?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's really a terrible thing, right? Because it becomes very difficult.
Aye, it is for a man in the west of Scotland, because there's very much, and when I grew up, the feminine was very much undervalued and undermined.
That's true.
Masculinity was valued, and sensitivity wasn't manly, and it wasn't masculine. So that's why I repressed it so deeply. And yes, it caused a conflict, because INTJs can be very detached and logical, but occasionally I would be extremely sensitive and irrational. So that's what balanced my rationality. My rational mind was balanced by this irrational sensitivity. But also, again, it's an adaptive trait when it's properly understood. This sensitivity and very strong intuition, it made me very good at my job as a testing and commissioning engineer, because I could see problems before they happened. I was very good at predicting problems and finding solutions. So,
Yeah, that's a good trait of intuition. That really helps. So, could you just also tell us, like, considering your own journey, how did shadow work help you, and what really shadow work is, like for a layman, and how should they begin it?
Well, as in our young life, we develop this persona, and you know, your child. It's a big, overwhelming world. So you have to have this image of yourself that's going to be able to adapt and get on in the world and become someone. So you repress anything that you don't like about yourself to give you that confidence to go out into the world. And but a lot of these, a lot of what you're repressing may be due to cultural and parental biases. So you might actually be repressing things that there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that you perceive them to be unacceptable. So integrate the shadow is expanding your ego, what you call your ego consciousness. So your persona will meet with your shadow, and when I integrated my sensitivity, it stopped being a problem. And while it was unconscious and repressed, I would see hostility in situations where there wasn't any. And I would be freaked out in situations where there was nothing to be freaked out by. But once I integrated my sensitivity, I could take ownership of it. And therefore, I could filter out, in social interaction, I could filter out what I perceived to be hostility and realise, no, it's just my sensitivity. So it's improved my perceptions. So by integrating the shadow, I've improved my perceptions of my social world and people.
So how difficult it becomes for a sensitive child or for a sensitive adult as a part of shadow work in journey of individuation to induce selective attachment in their life? Because for a sensitive person or for an empath, it's very difficult to set the boundaries and to allow selective attachment. How difficult it can become in shadow work?
Well, in order to be able to set boundaries, you have to integrate your feelings, or you'll never be able to set boundaries. So the shadow work, you have to do the shadow work. But what makes it possible is this: you have to work someone that can show you unconditional love, the acceptance. So that if they accepted your traits, then you can accept them, you can integrate them. And that was part of the process in my 12-step recovery journey. I worked with people who were taking me through the 12-step recovery program, and they showed me conditional love. They showed me acceptance, which I hadn't experienced in childhood. Through their love and acceptance, it then became possible for me to accept myself. So the shadow work it's really beneficial to find someone who has the capacity for unconditional love and acceptance.
That's true. It's really true. So I have a question. Like, as everyone dreams, right? So when we dream, living, I even posted that, like living in a three-dimensional world, right? But when we dream, it's kind of like they come from a higher dimensional world, right? Our soul reaches maybe fifth, sixth dimensional world, right? If not fourth, even higher than, we can just say that higher than our three-dimensional world, right? So our dreams come from a higher dimensional world. So how do you find that? I mean, isn't it fascinating? And how would you explain these things in a spiritual aspect?
I would I would say for not everyone experiences that, but a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say um, you probably have, if you're having those dreams, then
Mm-hmm.
you probably have a potential to access those higher dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
But at this stage in your individuation, you're maybe working on other aspects of your psyche.
Mm-hmm.
Or at the moment, you're still going through education and you're
Mm-hmm.
developing your knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
your rational mind.
Mm-hmm.
There may come a point in the future where you will then be ready to access these other dimensions and develop other aspects of your psyche. But
Mm-hmm.
for now, they're appearing in dreams.
Mm-hmm. It's just like that's why Jung said that during the first half of life we just build our ego, and
Yes.
second half of life would be letting go of the ego.
Yes.
So what
And
does he really mean by letting go of the ego? Is it the complete annihilation, or yeah, as we discussed before, like is it possible to have like or or is the ego a enemy to a person, or one needs to have a healthy ego like throughout the life?
a healthy ego knows its place within the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
You can never annihilate the ego. That would be that would be extremely harmful to try that. You become
Mm-hmm.
very there may be in certain stages of development where it's helpful to think in terms of defeating the ego, but it will
Mm-hmm.
only ever be temporary. The ego will always
Mm-hmm.
come back. And individuation is circular.
Mm-hmm.
You always
That's
go through
true.
periods of narcissism and then deflation.
Mm-hmm.
So the ego problem never fully goes away.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how many times, I mean, talking for myself, I can lapse into narcissism
Mm-hmm.
periodically, and then I'll experience the warning signs, maybe through dreams, maybe through my co-workers.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, "Oh God, I need to get my humility back and get back down to size."
Mm-hmm.
I do it, and it's great. And I keep thinking, "Oh yes, that's me. I don't have to do this again." But needless to say, at some point in the future, my ego will resurge. My narcissism will come back, not to the same degree as it was before.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, even I mean that's kind of a synchronicity. I was about to ask the question on narcissism. So as you said that, so it'd be kind of a shadow work, right? We don't experience the same intensity as we did once it was unconscious. So once it becomes conscious, so do we experience still even after integrating the shadow that narcissistic trait, or does that completely vanish?
No, it's a circular process
Mm-hmm.
because we're continually adapting to the world.
Mm-hmm.
We're continually having to go in these stages of inflation
Mm-hmm.
to so these things will repeatedly become operative. It's a circular process, and when you accept that it's a circular process,
Yeah, as Young said about circumambulation.
you're more prepared for it when it happens again.
Mm-hmm.
So you're quicker to get yourself out of inflation and back to humility.
So it's like if one doesn't have integrated any of the traits, so it's like an energy. It would be moving in a circle, and it would keep coming back to you. If you don't integrate it, it would again coming back to you like energy, right?
And some people believe in complete transcendence.
Mm-hmm.
So when you've completely transcended the ego,
Mm-hmm.
you are in a continual blissful state.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly haven't experienced that.
That would be really. I don't know if someone says that might be possible for them, but it's really a hard stage.
I don't know if it'll happen. I don't know if it's. I'm not sure. My jury's out on that one. I don't think you'll ever completely transcend the ego. It's
Mm-hmm.
because you've got to accept every part of yourself. That's
Mm-hmm.
that. That's what
Mm-hmm.
be, I think that's what being healthy is.
I see. So initially in the podcast, you talked about the child archetype during your journey of individuation. You discovered that, and could you just enlighten us, like how someone in their individuation journey uh, could identify the energies or even the possession related to child archetype? Because I remember, if I'm not wrong, certain archetypes or even all the archetypes, they carry some particular characteristics to identify them. So how did you identify that child archetype?
Okay. Well, as you were very prescient earlier in that you identified in me that my inner child had been lost in my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So it made me very flat emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a dry, mechanical person.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't spontaneous. And one of the characteristics of that lost and abandoned child was to get me into situations where the child could be spontaneous and be joyful and have fun.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that that child did that was for me to go and drink alcohol. Then I would go out and party.
Mm-hmm.
I went from being this surprised, repressed,
Mm-hmm.
repressed, shy person to being extremely outgoing,
Uh-huh. I
extremely
see.
gregarious. I would be up singing karaoke,
Mm-hmm.
and doing all these things that I would never do sober because I was so repressed. So that's an instance of that child archetype um, motivating me.
Mm-hmm. So,
That
so,
was
so we can say that, like, that if in a child possession state, he really likes to go to bamboo. So that would be one of the child possession stage.
he likes to have fun.
Uh-huh.
He likes to be adored
Mm-hmm.
and accepted and play. Likes to play.
Mm-hmm. So,
Play
so,
has,
but when it gets possessed, just like anima possession, uh, did you find any difference between anima possession and child possession? Because it always confuses me, like when we're in a stage of anima possession. So there are two anima possession. One is inferior function anima possession. Like in the case of INTJ, it can be their or let's say in case of ENTJ, it can be their inferior feelings, right? So that would be also the anima possession through their inferior function. They would be possessed by the inferior feeling. And the other is anima possession in terms of feelings or eros, if I could say. So how does they differ from uh, the inner child possession?
um, well, I'm trying to. I don't know how to avoid being sexist here, but as an INTJ, I would normally be detached and logical and rational.
Mm-hmm.
But when my anima possessed me, I would be extremely emotional
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
critical and verbally abusive.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be anima, and also I could be like moody,
Mm-hmm.
um, snooty. I don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
overly proud,
Mm-hmm.
stubborn. I mean, I'm not. I sound sexist here. Women have got wonderful. I love women. They've got
Yeah, I
wonderful
understand.
qualities. I could talk about all day as well. But when you talk about animal possession, I tend to go into the negative. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but the positive sides of the anima are unconditional love. I mean, if you notice, women celebrate life.
Mm-hmm.
Life.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much to learn from them. Whereas men are so
Mm-hmm.
hell bent on achieving, they miss out on life. Whereas women enjoy every single day of life.
Mm-hmm.
They just have this harmony and joy that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So integrating anima is also about integrating this love for life and this love for being in the moment, and not really so hell-bent on having to achieve things to feel good about yourself.
That's interesting, because it's really confusing for a layman. Even uh, I get confused many of the times, like between child possession and anima possession, because there would be a really slight difference. In my subjective opinion, I might be wrong, but it's there. There could be a very slight difference, because when you are possessed by anima, in terms of your inferior functions, it's very similar, behaving like a child. In terms of extroverted thinking, in terms of introverted feeling. So it wouldn't be same like child possession. It would be very near to that.
Well, all these archetypes are related.
Mm-hmm.
They don't just exist independently. They're all interrelated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if you're anima possession, there could be some of the child in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an expression as well.
Mm-hmm. I see.
They don't all exist in isolation. They're all interrelated.
Mm-hmm. I see. So I believe we are quite done with the majority of things related to the archetypal foundations of psyche, discussing anima, animus, ego, persona. So is there anything you would like to share with my listeners and to people about more about your individuation journey, and how should they proceed it, and how should they go on with that?
Well, from my experience of individuation, it's it's um, it's been a very positive experience. There's times it's
Mm-hmm.
challenging when you're confronted
Mm-hmm.
with things in your shadow that aren't very appealing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you embrace your shadow and you integrate, you become this whole person.
Mm-hmm.
Your relationship with people in the world just improves immensely.
Mm-hmm.
You have
Mm-hmm.
you have enhanced relations with people
Mm-hmm.
because you can relate to people. You can relate to anyone,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what individuation gives you, this ability to relate to everyone. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
before you can only see, really understand people from your own limited understanding of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have you have integrated and you have a comprehensive understanding of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
it allows you to relate to everyone because you no longer have these defenses.
Mm-hmm.
The individuation, you've overcome all these psychological defenses,
Mm-hmm.
masculine and feminine, and all these different things. Really, the goal is self-acceptance. When you have accepted yourself unconditionally and in entirety, you can do the same for everyone else. So, um,
So it's like acceptance is the key to change.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But the downside is there is a downside when you individuate.
Mm-hmm.
Very few people can relate to you
Uh-huh.
because not many people have experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
So it does get quite lonely as well.
That's true. That's true.
Um, just say people follow your heart.
Mm-hmm.
That'll take you to where you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
And follow your heart, follow your feelings. Um, don't get into things before you're ready. If you need to be
Mm-hmm.
ready to do
That's a
shadow
key
work.
point.
You need to be ready to do shadow work.
Mm-hmm.
Before you get involved in that, you need to have a strong and healthy ego and a strong
That's true.
persona and a strong
Mm-hmm.
self-image. So if you haven't achieved those things, I suggest you do that first.
Mm-hmm.
And then the shadow work, it'll call for you. You don't need to call for it, it'll call for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you will find whatever framework is right for you. For me,
Mm-hmm.
it was Carl Jung.
Mm-hmm.
And then that led me on to a whole host of other things as well. But everybody has their own path to follow.
Mm-hmm.
So don't just look at me and my path and think that's the right way. It's not. It's the right way for me. You need to find your own way.
Exactly. That's true.
Uh-huh.
You're right. So thank you so much, John, for joining me today on the podcast and enlightening everyone about your individuation journey and about your child, inner child. how you actually integrated that. It was really interesting, and I learned a lot of things from you today. And it was really a nostalgic moment for me, listening to the Scottish accent after a long time. It was really nice. If I found someone back from Glasgow, where I spent my 5 years, it was really nice meeting to you, and I hope to learn from you again. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Abdul. It was such a delight to have someone so interested in individuation and Jungian psychology, because there's not many of us out there.
Hmm.
So
That's true.
it was really pleasant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.